Streaming services are on the rise, and brick-and-mortar video stores are a thing of the past. We have lost that experience of wandering the aisles and stumbling upon a film we've never heard of. We have replaced the familiar face behind the video store counter with an algorithm to recommend films. With more and more content available, it's harder to know what's worth watching and what might be a waste of your time. There are many hidden gems out there waiting to be discovered, and we want to help you find them. This is Trailer Rewind, a podcast where we discuss and review recently forgotten or overlooked films that are now available to stream at home. In today's episode, we are going to discuss Tesla.
Is nature a gigantic cat? And if so, who strokes its back?
May I introduce the brilliant Nikola Tesla, the greatest inventor of the age.
If you Google Nikola Tesla, you get 34 million results. It's basically just 4 pictures. Beyond that, things get murky and more imaginative.
Thomas Alva Edison. Got a light? Oh, Tesla. Didn't see you there before.
I now have the pleasure of introducing you to a novel system of energy, alternate currents.
Today is March 2nd, 2021, and Tesla is available to stream on Hulu. And JJ, we are back with another season of Trailer Rewind. It is great to see you, my fine young man.
It's great to be back, and I will say that also Tesla is available on Amazon Prime.
Oh, is it also?
For those of us that do not have the Hulu.
So is it's streaming on there, or did you have to rent it on Amazon Prime?
Yes. Oh, no, you're right. I did have to rent it, didn't I?
You paid money for this again.
Okay, so it's Amazon Prime and Vudu.
Yes, you can rent it. Right. You can rent it, but for those that are subscribers, they can get it there
for free on Hulu, or for subscribers. Right?
For subscribers too. Well, that's what's interesting is we're here now dealing with sort of the fallout of 2020, because normally we talk about the path that a film took from theater to home theater. This one, you know, the whole distribution model has shifted. August 21st, 2020, Tesla was a day and date release for theaters and streaming platforms. So day and date is one of these phrases that to me doesn't make sense, because a day is a date. I don't know it, but I mean, it means basically it's hitting multiple sources at the same time. So you could go to the theater, you could see it on your streaming platforms, and then February 2nd, 2021, it became available on Blu-ray disc for those that are very attached to their physical media.
Physical media, yeah.
So there's not a lot of box office information out there. And it's just really challenging to talk about the path, because typically we look at, did this have a legitimate release? Then that gives movies a little bit more credibility if they had that theatrical release, versus going straight to streaming. But now I think things were getting thrown in theaters to see what would stick, all of those things. So,
that's a lot of what it is. It feels very experimental.
It does. And with the day and date release, I'm surprised to see that there are things still going out to physical media, but I know that there are some people that's their preferred method of watching. Actually, since it's March 2021, we can talk about the fact that just recently in your feeds, there is an episode that Andy and I recorded talking about licensing and ownership and digital and streaming and all those legal issues. Oh my. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to put a little plug in for that special episode that Andy and I did. But we're here to talk about Tesla. Now, JJ, this was a film that was directed by Michael, I'm going to mess up his name as I always do, Michael Almereyda. We talked about his 2015 film Experimenter, and I know you remember Experimenter, right? I mean, that was the whole Stanley Milgram experiment, all of that. Knowing that that's the same director, did you see any similarities between Tesla and Experimenter?
You know, I didn't when I was watching it. I couldn't tell right away. And I didn't find out, you had told me before or had let me know that it was this director. I can draw similarities now knowing that they're similar, but this was definitely a different film than Experimenter. There is the historical aspect of it, but I think this is boosting up to another level for
Well, I did notice some stylistic things, and I remember we commented on this in talking about The Experimenter. There would be scenes where our actors would be there in front of like a projected background. As I recall, an Experimenter there, I think there was a dinner scene where husband and wife were at a dinner table and they're in a larger house, but they're clearly not on a set. We saw a lot of that here in Tesla, typically with wilderness, frontier landscapes. There's, Tesla interacting with some horses out there in Colorado.
More focused on the word that I'm going to use when we talked about this in more depth is the novelty aspect of what you're talking about. So Experimenter was a little bit more focused on the narrative of the story, where this one really seemed to pull in a lot of different elements of novelty to assist in whatever sort of thing Almereyda was trying to get across.
Well, I guess, without getting into spoilers, and, I don't know that there's a way to spoil this movie that much. But stylistically, what are those things that, stood out? Because this is a film that I felt tried a lot of things, and there are some sequences that work and there's some that I think are a miss. But what was it for you that sort of these, innovations or experiments that he was, trying to do as a filmmaker that stood out to you?
Well, you talk about that projected background, and I think that is maybe the plainest example of how I'm going to describe it here, but the film really feels like it's a stage show put on screen. And we get that in sort of a number of different breaking fourth wall pieces, and a bunch of other things that are very, the word I would use is experimental in trying to get across a mood rather than the story in and of itself. So I agree. It's really difficult to spoil this movie, but I would say if you like that sort of thing, if you like some risks taken in the way that storytelling is done that resemble the kind of things that you would get in terms of the creativity that you would see on a stage show, then that's really what this movie is going to deliver. And we're going to get into talk about what the specific things are later, but it's jarring in some cases, and I feel like that's maybe on purpose in the name of the art.
So as you mentioned, sort of like a stage production, for me, it felt in some ways like a documentary in some ways, in terms of not necessarily having a narrative story to tell, but present us with a series of scenes and sequences that tell us about this character. And for me, I think that's I think the key piece of, I guess, experimentation with this that I would want people to know before jumping into this is that if you're expecting a traditional biopic with, here's this guy and he's, here's the lows of his life and here's the high points of his life and all of those pieces, and there's a nice linear trajectory of his success and failures. That's not this movie. It's very much more fragmented. I think, yes, theatrical is definitely one word that I would use to describe it.
This is far more Vox Lux than what you were describing.
Yes. Yeah. Another throwback to last year. There we go. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I agree that it has a theatrical presentation to it that is more about the characters than necessarily about the story. So given that, because there's we can talk a lot about this, and as I said, there's not a lot of spoilers, but I think talking about where it stands in our ratings and rankings may give people a good sense. I think that's really all that we can say about it before delving into it, because once we start talking about pieces, I feel like we're going to be all over the place with this movie.
Yeah,
so
I think so too.
What was, with your ranking and rating that you use, where did this film fall for you?
Well, I want to start with the ranking of it, or not, actually the rating of it, because I had it was a kind of an odd experience watching this movie. I got distracted at times from what I thought I was watching, and something new would come up and hit me. And I think when we start to get into what those things are, as we talk about in the show, I think it'll make more sense. But when I was with the story early on, I was thinking that this movie was high enough that I was going to put it in like a 3.5 in terms of stars rating for me. But I would say some of the stuff that happens in that theatrical presentation, like you talk about, really sort of confused me. And so I ended up with like right in the middle as a 2.5 because I wanted to honor the artful things that it did that I enjoyed. But then I was just so confused by some of the other things there that I put it right in the middle. And because of that, because of the direction it took me, I actually put it at like 3.5 and a not like.
So wait, so you end 2.5 or 3.5? Okay.
Or sorry, 2.5. 2.5 and a not like. Sorry. Yeah.
So
that was what I was gonna say.
Did you throw this
Right.
into your flick chart at all to do a ranking? Okay.
I did, and it ended up pretty low. And I actually, when you told me that it was by Almereyda, I went and saw where Experimenter was. Experimenter actually was pretty high for me. So when we start talking about those artful things that Almereyda does as a filmmaker and how it's woven into the story, I really liked what some of those things were in Experimenter. But this ended up pretty low because I got confused most of the time. So it dropped down. It's at 178 out of, for me, I have a little bit, 247. So that's actually pretty low for me. But the interesting place is where it ends up. And I think it's going to be in the world of the next reel. It's going to have a very interesting place. It is just below the Congress.
All right. Yes.
Talk about confusing, and just above Hillbilly Elegy. So, so that gives you a sense of what feelings I had when I came to the film, and that's very low. That says I should even be ranking it with less stars. But again, I wanted to honor the things that I liked about it early on in the film.
I'm really pretty much about the same place. I came in at 2.5 stars. I felt that it did start off stronger as well. There were some really interesting and engaging elements that were coming together. And yeah, my attention wandered. I don't know if I was confused or if I was just adrift in a sequence of scenes with characters, but it was really hard to pull me all the way through to the end. So yeah, I ended up with 2.5 stars. It ended up low. It ended up at 501 out of 695, which is really low near the bottom. It ends up in a really weird place. It's just below Halloween, the original Halloween, which I just watched this past, Halloween. I was surprised at like how nothing happens for the vast majority of that film. And it's the last like 10 or 15 minutes, and everything else. Our sensibilities have changed when it comes to horror films. And it's just above this other small little forgettable film called The Young and Prodigious T.S. Spivet. It's an adaptation of like an adaptation of like a young adult novel of this kid who leaves home. He's one of these brilliant kids, and he's going to be this inventor. And it's an interesting book. The story just couldn't capture the whimsy and the fancifulness of that. And it ended up being just this forgettable, I remember watching it vaguely. And I think that's where, unfortunately, I think Tesla is going to be for me, is a film that 6 months from now, I'll remember a couple of things. And then I'll say, I don't remember anything else. There'll be 2 or 3 things I can count on my fingers that are seared into my brain that I will never forget. And that's it.
I'm going to remember the shocking things that I didn't like far more than the interesting things I did like. And I see too with the number that you said, that 501 out of 695, that it was reporting 28% for you. My number's exactly the same at 178 out of 247. So we actually, it sounds like we had very similar feelings about the movie altogether.
Over on Letterboxd, it has a weighted average review of 2.8 out of 5, based on just 5,000 reviews. So it's one that, it's right there under 3 stars, which is where we put it. So listeners, if you think this is your kind of film, you don't want anything spoiled, you want to walk into something that's maybe a little experimental and innovative to its strengths or weaknesses, this is your chance to pause the podcast and go check out Tesla on Hulu. Okay, JJ, we can get into Tesla here. Where do we start? Do we start with the things that are seared into my mind from near the very end of the film? Do we start with it being on track at the beginning?
The very end is such a big deal. So I think maybe the first thing to talk about is how much, I was getting into it a little bit even before we started talking about spoilers, but there's a few times where they say this never happened, or they say what you're witnessing on screen is not real. And sometimes you can see it's an exaggeration and it makes sense. But what do you think about in terms of telling a historical story with things that are not actually part of the story? How did that affect you? How did you feel when let's talk about the first one. So the ice cream cone fight scene when Edison and Tesla smash ice cream cones into each other. That time doing this fake thing was for an effect to I guess, detail to the viewer how the negativity is between these two men is going to continue because they couldn't do it with any sort of sense of reality. Is that your impression of that event? And is that what they're doing with all of these unreal suggestions throughout the film?
That's a really interesting question, because when I think about a movie that's calling attention to the fact that it's showing us things that didn't really happen and having characters tell us that, there's two other movies that come to mind. And the first one is Michael Winterbottom's film, 24-Hour Party People. And there's a scene at a nightclub. This is, it's set in the early 80s. It's about like the alternative music scene, like New Order, Happy Mondays, all that. There's a scene in a nightclub in a bathroom where our main character has a confrontation because his wife is having sex with another guy in the bathroom stall. And as they have the argument and they leave, the camera pans past, and then the actual man who was there, because it says the real, so-and-so, and he basically says, I don't remember this happening at all. So you've got a character who, and again, because it's a true story, you've got the actual person there saying, I don't recall this happening. And then I also think of I, Tonya. There's that.
That's what I was going to go to right away. Because in I, Tonya, they do it in a really interesting way where they but what they're doing in that is they do it with suggested stories, right? Or reported stories. And they portray the reported stories, and then they portray a different character, a lot of times Tonya Harding herself. Right. They portray her version saying this didn't happen, or one of the other people. So that seems like to be at least rooted in some sort of source material that makes sense. Right. Where what we have here with the ice cream cone fight is it feels like it's done for some sort of poetic purpose about what they want to tell us throughout the rest of the story. Did you feel that way?
Yeah, I don't even know if I want to give them credit for that. For me, it was early on enough in the movie that it's quirky. It seems appropriate for the era because they've got, people had ice cream back then. And the ice cream cones, and it seems like something that a bunch of men lounging around in an afternoon after they work might have had some ice cream. So it makes sense that they might in an argument do that. To say that didn't happen, or we're pretty sure that's not how it happened. It's not like an apocryphal tale that people have heard of, or it's not something that is common knowledge, or it's not something that the fight between Edison and Tesla is something that people have a lot of familiarity with. So for me, or direct memory of. Right. And so for them to do that throughout this, I don't know what the reason for that is, because.
So if you're not going to assume a poetic or story purpose to that, then I'm going to bring up a part later in the movie, and what did you think about the cell phone?
Yes,
do you know what I'm talking
exactly
about?
What you're talking about?
Okay, I had to rewind it. Because, and I'll say for the audience, so if you're listening to this podcast right now, they describe a scene where at the Chicago World's Fair, Edison and Tesla sit down and they reconcile and they talk about what amazing things they could do together if they would just work together. And then Edison stands up, he goes to the bar, he orders a Coke, he's lighting up a smoke, he declines a glass, he drinks directly from the bottle, and then he whips out a cell phone and starts swiping. So I had to rewind it. I stopped it and was like,
why does Edison have like a smartphone that he's just scrolling, through Instagram or something?
Yeah, it's not a cell phone. Sorry, it's a smartphone. You're right. I should be clear. It's a smartphone. So, they do draw no attention to it. There is no narrative. There's no fourth wall interruption about it. There is anything. So the only thing I can think of is some sort of poetic service to the story of saying that if they would have reconciled, these brilliant inventors, these titans of electricity, could have thought of something as cool as the smartphone, and Edison would be drinking his Coke and swiping away at the bar years before its time. Is that what they're saying? Because for me, I was just like, wait a second.
Because as I recall,
Edison's on Tinder? How does this work?
That's the point where Edison like apologizes to Tesla and says, you were right. And then our narrator says, Edison never apologized. This didn't happen. So yeah, the question is, why give us those scenes? Is there something about the character? Why give us something and then pull it away and say this didn't happen? Why give us anachronistic scenes of Edison scrolling through a smartphone? And I thought, what is it trying to get at? And the only thing I could think of was that we're given a story in, the year 2021 about something that happened about 100 years ago. And so things are so different. So is it an attempt to say, well, nowadays, this is what Edison would do. This is what a person would normally do, is you've just had a fight with somebody and it doesn't, I'm not even going to think about him and I'm just going to go. That's what I took away, because I couldn't find anything.
That's so much less smart than the stretch that I just gave it. Like, if they're just doing that, like, what the heck? Then why aren't there Starbucks coffee cups everywhere? If it's just like,
so let's get back to the ice cream cone fight, because what happens right after that is, and we'll drop the scene here for audience members listening, because it's something that's in the trailer, as I recall, and it caught my eye in the trailer. But just take a listen to this.
This is pretty surely not how it happened. But what can I tell you? If you Google Nikola Tesla, you get 34 million results. But for images, there are mostly just 3 or 4 photographs repeated over and over. They get flipped around, some are colorized or photoshopped with lightning in the background, but it's basically just 4 pictures. Beyond that, things get murky and more imaginative.
After the ice cream fight, where we're told it probably didn't happen, we get this interruption from our narrator that is breaking the fourth wall, talking directly to us. And it's not enough that it's breaking the fourth wall. We're breaking all kinds of rules, because it's the character of Anne, who is a character in the narrative, but she's on a laptop talking about if you Google Tesla. So so this is where the documentary piece for me starts to come in, because it's giving us information. It's telling us there's really only about 4 pictures of Tesla that are out there. Anything beyond that, she says, things get more murky and more imaginative. And I'm wondering if that is what's driving the rest of the film, is we don't know that much. So we're in this murky and imaginative story about this man, Nikola Tesla.
I understand your comparison to documentary, but if we evaluate this film as a documentary, it is quite simply the strangest documentary
I agree.
Ever
it's not a documentary, but I feel like it's using that.
It's a documentary
style of, it's not always it's not always a linear story that builds on itself. Sometimes there's pieces that are missing, and we jump from one moment in time to another key moment in the character's life, where we're moving back and forward in time, rather than A, then B, then C.
It's almost more. It's more journalistic than it is a film. But so I like what you're saying with this, and why you bring this up. So in the audio clip, she says, beyond that, things get more murky and imaginative. So she's introducing us to the fact that we're making it up. But before this scene, we have a scene at the same table that is the first scene of the movie, which actually is probably my favorite scene, where Edison, Tesla's just coming onto the job. Edison is telling this elaborate, creepy story about a time when he was a child. I think he was 5 years old, and he went swimming with his pal, and he tells the story in a way that he goes swimming with the pal, and then he leaves and he goes home. And then he finds later out that the pal never came back, that his friend never came back. And he just tells his mom a story about, well, I saw him go into the water and then he didn't. And then, I just assume that people can swim, or they have to be able to swim. And then this whole thing is introducing Tesla to the group. And literally, it's like he's telling I murdered someone at 5 years old, so welcome. I'm going to murder you too. But my point about the whole thing is it's very intensely done. It's very beautifully shot in this low light, candlelit table as they're waiting for the electricity to turn back on, which again sets up the movie in a very wonderful way based on their inventions. And it's really intense. The perspective of the cameras is great. The focus and the switching of focus, like I loved all that stuff. That's why I was at a 3.5 when the movie started. But you get to this thing, and I want to go back to the audio clip. If the ice cream's not real, then the swimming story's not real either. These things are all told in service of the mood that they want to infer upon us, as opposed to a sort of documentary style about what the real lives of Edison and Tesla were,
yes, right? I think you're right on with that, because I agree. That was a powerful story. I have no idea if Edison ever told that story, if that is something that happened to him.
It can't be.
I mean, for me, it's set up thematically to me, Edison was saying, look, for me, it wasn't a confession of murder so much as, hey, I went swimming with my friend. And he says he went home sort of forlorn, or I can't remember the exact phrasing, and despondent or something. And then he went to bed, and then his parents came in.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, well, yeah, I just assumed he could swim. And then Tesla says, I can swim. And for me, that was Edison saying,
after asking, Edison asks a bunch of other questions that Tesla decides not to answer. And instead he just says, I can swim.
I think it's Edison saying, look, I move fast, and I'm going to assume you can keep up with me. And if you can't keep up with me, I have no use. Yeah.
I'm a murderer.
I have no use for you. You're useless to me. And so for Tesla to say, well, I can swim, I can keep up with you. I can play this game with you. And for me, it works that way. And early on, I thought this is great. There's some good writing going on here. But then, as we get further along and we're calling into question the validity or the veracity of anything that we're being presented, I thought, well, if that's fabricated and that's fabricated, then that great scene is fabricated, and it just undermines the power of anything going on. And I was really disappointed. It hollowed out the movie for me so much, because we don't have a narrative structure that's going to get me to build any affinity or connection with Tesla and his personal struggle. He's set off as a very distant character. There's no characters to identify with, because we don't see them really go through anything at all. We see scenes.
Well, that's why I bring up Vox Lux.
Okay.
Right. I mean, really, I think about what we saw in Vox Lux, and it's told in these sort of three movements or two movements in Vox Lux, and this idea that really it's really meant to be sort of like an interpretive poem about what's happening here. And when they pull out the veracity, and instead they're telling us these details that are trying to put us in a place as a viewer to watch this thing, I feel like that was their intent in doing this. Is this some sort of subjective idea of the rivalry between Edison and Tesla and the life of Tesla as he goes on? The interesting thing is the way that they told that is filled with novelty. And I use that word a lot on our shows. Andy Nelson actually asked me, sort of like to describe novelty more. And for me, it's like anything that is extra narrative of the story. And so you feel like the stuff in Scott Pilgrim versus the World, right? Where you get sort of effects and all these things and on the side of thing. Or you think of like similar to this in the historical documentary style, you have when we did The Five Bloods for the film board, where Spike Lee at the beginning of the movie, he gave us things that were not part of the story narrative at all to really root us in history for what was happening there. So sometimes it can be done really well. One of my favorite films like that is Run, Lola, Run, where they break up things with some novelty here. The interesting thing about how it's presented in Tesla is that it isn't done in a specific way. It doesn't feel like it's done in a specific way or for a specific purpose. So we end up getting a little bit confused at why we have a narrator that chimes in at specific times. And we don't know how it is in service to the story, whether it's being told in truth or not. And then, of course, I'm not sure if you're ready to talk about this yet, but then, of course, we have karaoke.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we have to talk about that because I was watching it. My wife was in the room sort of half watching because she's, Ethan Hawke is it's somebody that we grew up with, cinematically, so
wonderfully versatile actor.
Tesla's an interesting,
tons of different stuff.
Man to see his story. And so we get to that point and she just looks up and she's like, what is going on? What?
Right? Ethan Hawke
Is
in
he in
character.
character?
Nikola
That's her question.
Tesla. Well, he sings with a partially
Okay,
Austrian accent. So, so in character, singing with a mic, which maybe is speaking to, again, electricity as an innovation, with a green screen-ish background of varying colors, which we use throughout the film too, to Everybody Rules the World by Tears for Fears.
Which...
It is one of the greatest WTF moments that I've ever seen on film.
I mean, the song choice makes sense, though, in terms of the story.
Oh, yeah. Again, in service to the story. It's not crazy. It's actually an interesting idea for a song cue there. But what is happening?
I don't know, because where are we? Right.
They don't explain it. And it's not right. We're nowhere. We're in nowhere's land. So maybe... Are they doing something like Dogville, right? Where you take us completely out of the narrative story to tell it as if, again, a stage show, the way I feel? Or, who knows? It's so confusing.
No, it doesn't, because we haven't, everywhere else we've been grounded in the story in an actual setting there. Even Anne, our narrator. Right.
Or the history, right? Or it's catching us up in history.
So, even Anne, as the narrator, when she has her moments with her laptop and Google and projector and all that, she's in Tesla's lab. So it's not like she's in some weird unknown space. We're always someplace, historically, whether it's in Colorado or, Menlo Park, or we're in these different places that we could say, oh, it's this physical location and time. That's where we are. When Tesla's singing, I don't know.
Yep.
If he's supposed to be in a karaoke bar and it's like the smartphone type thing, if we're in his head of he's just, this is representing his thoughts and, anxieties about, the struggles and what the life lessons he's learned. I don't know what to make of it. And that's the most challenging thing with it, right?
Well, you weren't even sure if it was Tesla or Ethan Hawke singing.
Because
that's the thing.
It could totally be Ethan Hawke just saying, let me sing this song as Tesla to wrap this movie up. I don't know.
Exactly. It definitely could be. I don't fault you for that. I was so confused that you could say anything. You could say this is Ethan Hawke, reprising Reality Bites right now for us, and I would probably go, "Oh, there's a service to the story." I don't know, because it's so darn confusing.
It would have pushed credibility and credulity of the film if we had him walk into a karaoke bar in, the 1920s or whatever. But at least we would know we were there, and we could say, oh, it's an anachronistic thing that they're doing once again. Yeah, it is really the most at that point. Well, I guess if you start strong with some story things, you go off who knows where along the way, you might as well just shoot the moon there at the end and just go for whatever you want, because there's nothing that they could have done at that point that was going to make this a satisfying movie for me, because like you, I was so lost and disoriented and afloat. I wasn't, I know enough about Tesla to say, okay, these are familiar points that, I've learned in just reading about him or watching other documentaries that I know, oh yes, these are these important key points in his life. But I have no, what's my takeaway? Am I supposed to feel sympathetic? I have no idea how to feel about him and his life. And then you throw this song at the end where I thought, okay, this still doesn't give me any emotional resonance of what I'm supposed to be doing, other than you're sort of hitting me over the head with the theme of, power and capitalism and industry and all these people that, basically he was the victim of all of these power players at the time. But it doesn't tell me that I'm supposed to feel, sad for him, that he was, taken advantage of. I get that. I think better in the scene. I think it's just prior to that, of where he's going, where he's sort of like lurking outside the tennis court, right? As JP and his Morgan his family and friends are there playing tennis, and Tesla's there to ask for more money to explain his next crazy scheme. And at that point, you look at him and think, okay, here's a man who's sort of at his last. He's at the end of his rope. He's nothing has worked out for him, and I felt that moment. I felt something for him. It wasn't well executed. There were issues with that.
Well, and so how did it turn around for you then in the scene after that, where he then is back in his experimental, I'm going to call it a generator,
Right.
but a dynamo, let's say that, his experimental dynamo in Colorado, and you have the narrator, Anne Morgan, J.P. Morgan's daughter, describing the fact that Tesla outlived
Right.
them all and reaped and ended up reaping, probably not the same
Right.
sort of renown as Edison and maybe not the same kind of fortune, but he was never really poor. He had access to all this stuff
Right.
throughout his life. So the interesting thing is you have the tennis court scene where you feel that he's a pitiful
Right.
because of his decisions, but he, in many different times in this film, instead of choosing a very common sense route to money, to success, to love, to attraction, he chooses to be with his obsession, which is his scientific discovery. And I think, I think it's really interesting to then turn around and see that while he had to beg to get those things funded, he still got to live where he wanted to live, in the heart of his electric dynamo. Yeah. That's a really interesting thing. And I think, and again, Anne is the one telling us this, right? So that's interesting to say too.
There's so many moments that I really wanted to connect with this film, and ultimately it continually just let me down. We've got so much. It's an exciting era in history with such potential and invention and innovation. And you've got these, these names, you've got, Westinghouse, and you've got the actress Sandra Bernhard. You've got
names.
these, he's in with these power players. You thought, okay, this should be very compelling, story tip for us, but it doesn't. And I can't put my finger on it of like, this is how it failed. And it's this one thing, but it's multiple things that just don't tie it together the way I guess.
Until the karaoke, the smartphone was really hard for me. The smartphone, I literally stopped and rewound and had to question myself multiple times. But so the smartphone and the smartphone like knocked it off a half star, but the karaoke dropped it like a full star and a half for me, because it was just like, I was completely baffled at that point. I could not figure out what the heck I was supposed to be doing as an audience member in this movie. And I think, we talk about who the movie's for. You're going to have to love that sort of WTF. I have no idea what's going on here. This is wild. How did they even think to do this? You have to love that sort of thing to be just knocked out of your gourd and watching a movie like that to really like this movie. And I assume that Ethan Hawke and Kyle MacLachlan are those kind of guys based on their history in film. Kyle MacLachlan especially, but because the choice to do that, and the choice for Ethan Hawke to come out and sing that low, everybody wants to rule the world. It was just so weird and creepy and confusing, but kudos to them for throwing that art out there.
What's interesting is that Ethan Hawke has worked with Michael Almereyda previously. They did a version of Hamlet back in 2000. And I remember at that time, and I haven't seen it, but I remember what was innovative about that, was that this was like they moved Hamlet to the modern setting of like late 20th century. So how do you update Shakespeare for that? And lots of people have done this, but it was very much, in the city type of Hamlet. So
like when we're introduced to Sarah Bernhardt in this, and we get in Paris and we get a like early 2000s house beat as the music
exactly. Cue. So I think it's something, for lack of a better term, it's a genre that they like to play around in. Of doing something that's sort of out of time.
Creativity.
But it was so disruptive here that it didn't work, because there was another scene, maybe at the Chicago Expedition. There's a scene where Tesla's leaving a meeting. Maybe it's with Westinghouse, something else. And as he's walking out, it's like the party's over and they're cleaning the room, and there's like the maids, and then one of them's got like a vacuum, an upright vacuum. And I thought, did they have those then? I don't think they had those then. I'm pretty sure they didn't have upright vacuums if electricity is that new. But again, I wasn't sure where I was in time. And I thought maybe because we're at
how could you know?
Because we're at this exposition and there's all kinds of innovations. Maybe but then I thought,
oh, did you miss the Roomba? I'm just kidding. There wasn't a room, but still, like, yeah. I mean, but your point is well taken. Like, how do we know where we are in it? It's
so are there
impossible.
things that worked for you in this film? Because I mean, yes, it's flawed, but I always like to, very, very rarely is there a film that is like such a disaster. I say that there's nothing redeeming in it. And I think the beginning of this one works. And I think there are several moments throughout, but I wanted to see if this was, if once it went off, you just gave up on it, or if there were moments throughout that maybe captured your attention briefly.
Well, so rarely do I say, the way that I defined novelty before, so rarely do I say that there's too much novelty or the novelty takes me out of a film. So, but in this case, it was that way, in that what I liked most about this movie was when it was sticking to its story, whether or not that story was true. The amount of novelty that got brought in was confusing to me and became more confusing. And then, of course, once we got to that last moment, the karaoke moment, it was like brutal for me. I really liked what they were doing in sort of the filming of the human interactions. I mentioned that first scene when Edison is telling the story and we're shooting Edison straight on, or we're shooting over Edison's right shoulder to see the person on his immediate right in focus, listening to him with rapt attention, because this is Edison's room, it's Edison's lab, these, doing this thing. And then deep in the corner at the other than the table, you have a Tesla who's working, sort of not mindfully, but not paying attention to Edison's story but he's slightly out of focus. But you can tell that, it is Ethan Hawke and like that kind of stuff, that perspective and the way that those stories were told through dialogue and visually through dialogue. I really liked that. And when the story was sticking to that stuff, I loved it. I thought the emotional moments when they were there, while I didn't always understand the emotion, especially in gender dynamics and romantic questions, because they didn't really answer any of those questions. I thought they were powerful. I just was confused at where the power was being pushed. So I really focus on, if you like the sort of chaotic art that is going to be presented in this movie, you're going to like it. But on the other side, if even that's tough for you, you're going to see some of the beauty in just the filmmaking aspects of this, and that really harkens back to Experimenter for me. So when you talk about Almereyda, that is something that I think he does well, and you're going to see that in this movie too.
I mean, yeah, there are those moments. And I think the film does a disservice to itself by setting itself up early on to be something that it's not going to follow through on. Because actually our opening scene is Tesla like roller skating around. And we get Anne narrating, telling us about young Tesla, and when he's got a cat, and he's a young boy, and he's stroking the cat's fur and it generates static electricity. And then his father explains that that's like lightning and all that. And Tesla asks himself, is nature a giant cat? And if so, who strokes it back? And I thought, that it's telling us something. And then it says 9 years earlier. And that's where we get to Edison, working for Edison. And I thought, okay, we're going to come back to this scene, and there's going to be some emotional resonance to what with Tesla roller skating.
Yes. It's going to be a big scene when we get there. That's what you thought.
Because it happens and there's nothing. And it set up so many expectations for that, because I thought this is working so well. And even with the early scenes with Edison, it's setting up all of these things. And then it just, I want to say it gave up on trying to be that kind of film.
It kind of disappears.
Because there's scenes with Anne, there's these character scenes, and they're few and far between, but there's no emotion to connect me to them at all. And I guess that's where we come back to that journalistic piece of, it's going to report out these things that happened to this man, and then he sang karaoke and then he died. And that's what we have with Tesla. Okay. Well,
he inspired Tears for Fears, evidently, because wow. I mean, who knew? I didn't know they wrote that. They took Tesla to write that.
This is one that, yeah, as you said, if you like the chaos, then give it a shot. But yeah, this is one that I can't imagine coming back to. There's no reason for me.
No, when I talk to people about it, it's going to be about Tesla singing.
Yeah, right.
Tears for Fears,
exactly. So yeah, solid 2.5 stars with a few bright spots. So yeah, okay. Right. I think we've drained the power out of this film, and that's about where we are.
I like it. Yes. Yeah. Light the bulbs. We're ready to move on.
Well, this is our first one for the next, this upcoming batch of trailer rewinds. And so we're going to try and do 2 a month. And so our next rewind is Luce, Luce, which is available right now on Hulu. And just want to thank everybody out there for listening to Trailer Rewind. And if anything we said here entertained, educated, or even enraged you, we'd like to hear about it. And you can do that by joining our Discord community of movie lovers. You can learn more over at thenextreel.com/Discord. And if you're interested in supporting us to help keep the show streaming, to keep the karaoke going, you can get some great benefits like pre-show live video chat with the film board and live streams of shows as they are happening. To do that, you just head over to thenextreel.com/membership. Well,
welcome to your life.
Oh,
no,
anyway. Where's Tommy?
You said keep the karaoke going.
Yes, we do. Where's Tommy when we need him? We need him to record a little Tears for Fears stinger for us at the end of this one. Well, JJ, it's been a pleasure talking about this. I don't want to say unpleasant film, but confusing film.
No, it's not.
I guess.
Yeah,
yes.
Confusing. Good word.
Yes. Well, we look forward to talking to you for our next one.
See you on the next one.
Hondo.